Experience the kinetic energy of a life in constant motion, where every choice creates a ripple that changes the world forever. We capture the heat of the moment through our unique 3D cinematic lens. Click subscribe now and be part of the energy that defines our digital world. The night my grandson slipped that note under my bedroom door, I almost missed it. I'd gotten up for a glass of water, something I do at least twice a night now that I'm 67, and I nearly stepped right on it. A torn piece of notebook paper folded into a small square. I picked it up, squinting in the hallway light. 6 words in his careful 10-year-old handwriting. "Grandpa, look inside the old toolbox." I stood there in my socks on the cold hardwood floor, reading those 6 words 3 times. My grandson, Danny, was asleep in the guest room down the hall. He'd been staying with me for the past 2 weeks while my son Robert and his wife Carol were settling into their new house across town. At least that's what Robert had told me. I folded the note back up and held it in my fist the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I want to tell you a little about Danny before I tell you what I found. Because if you're going to understand why what happened next shook me to my core, you need to understand who that boy is. Danny turned 10 last March. He's got his mother's eyes, his biological mother, Claire, who passed from an aggressive cancer 4 years ago when Danny was just 6. He's quiet the way smart kids are quiet. He notices things. He'll sit at the kitchen table while I'm cooking and just watch. And then 20 minutes later he'll say something like, "Grandpa, you looked sad when you were stirring that soup. Were you thinking about Grandma?" He was right. I was. Claire had been my daughter-in-law for 8 years, and I loved her like she was my own. When she died, I watched my son Robert go through something I wouldn't wish on anyone. Grief like that hollows a man out. For 2 years, Robert was just a shell. He went to work, he came home, he fed Danny, he went to bed. I drove over 3 times a week to make sure Danny had a hot dinner and someone to talk to. Then Robert met Carol. I tried to be fair. I told myself I was just protective of Danny, that any woman entering that boy's life would face an uphill battle with me. I told myself to give her a chance. But there was something about the way Carol looked at Danny when Robert wasn't in the room. Not mean, exactly. Not something I could point to and say, "There, that's it." Just absent. Like Danny was furniture she hadn't chosen but had to live with. Danny would say something at dinner and Carol would smile in Robert's direction, not his. Danny would show her a drawing he'd done at school and she'd say, "That's nice, sweetie," without looking at it. Robert didn't see it, or he didn't want to. I brought it up once, carefully, about 6 months after they got married. Robert looked at me with this tired expression and said, "Dad, you've never given her a real chance. Danny loves her." I let it go. I told myself I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong about the way Danny had started going quiet in a different way. Not the thoughtful quiet of a kid who notices things. A smaller, careful quiet, like he was trying to take up less space. So when I unfolded that note in the hallway at 2 in the morning, I knew in my gut that what I was going to find in that toolbox was going to change things. I just didn't know how much. Here's what you need to know about the toolbox. It's an old red Craftsman chest, about 3 feet tall, on wheels. I've had it for 30 years. It lives in the back corner of my garage, against the wall next to my workbench. It's heavy, even empty it's heavy, and the wheels don't roll well anymore because I replaced the linoleum in there years ago and the new surface catches them. Nobody moves that toolbox. It hasn't moved in probably 6 years. The garage connects to the house through a side door off the kitchen. Robert and Carol had been over to help me move some boxes from the spare room 2 weekends ago, before Danny came to stay. They'd been in the garage briefly. I remembered now that Carol had gone out there alone to grab a roll of packing tape while Robert and I were stacking boxes. She'd been gone maybe 10 minutes. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. I waited until I heard Danny's alarm go off at 7:30. I heard him shuffle to the bathroom, heard the water run. I put the coffee on and made eggs. And when he came to the kitchen table, I set a plate in front of him and sat down across from him and said nothing for a moment. He looked up at me. "I found your note," I said quietly. He put his fork down. Something moved across his face, relief, fear, both at once. He nodded. "Can you tell me what's in there?" I asked. He shook his head. "I didn't look. I heard her on the phone. In the garage. When you were all moving boxes." He stopped, picked his fork back up, then put it down again. She didn't know I was sitting on the back steps. The door was open a little. "What did you hear?" He looked at the table. "She said your name, Grandpa." And she said he stopped again. She said, "The old man won't even know what hit him." The kitchen was very quiet. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "The exact right thing. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to finish breakfast, and you're going to go to school, and you're not going to say a single word about this to anyone. Not your dad, not Carol, not your friends. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long moment with those eyes that are so much like his mother's. "Are you going to be okay, Grandpa?" "I'm going to be just fine," I said. "I promise." I watched his school bus pull away from the curb, and then I stood in the garage doorway for a long time before I walked over to that old red toolbox. I didn't touch it right away. I stood there in the gray morning light coming through the single garage window, looking at it, looking at the thin layer of dust on the lid, looking at the wheels sitting slightly crooked on the floor. And then I noticed something I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been looking for it. The dust on the lid had been disturbed along one edge, a clean half circle, like someone had opened it and closed it again. Someone had been in there recently. I lifted the lid. The top tray holds my most used tools, my good screwdrivers, pliers, a measuring tape, a level. Everything looked normal at first, but when I lifted the top tray out and set it on the workbench, I saw it in the lower compartment, underneath my old socket wrench set, a small orange prescription bottle with my name on the label. But I hadn't prescribed. I'd never seen this bottle before in my life. My name, my address, but a prescription I'd never filled. And next to it a folded piece of paper, not handwritten, printed, an insurance document. My home insurance policy, but with a note attached, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Policy lapse, third notice. Unpaid since August. I sat down on my garage stool. My insurance policy was not lapsed. I paid it automatically, every month, directly from my checking account. I had the statements to prove it. I pulled out my phone right there and logged into my bank account and scrolled back 3 months. Every payment, made on time. Nothing lapsed. So someone had created a fake document. Someone had printed a letter that looked like an insurance lapse notice and placed it in my toolbox along with a prescription bottle carrying my name and a medication I'd never taken. I sat very still for a long time, thinking. Then I took out my phone and called the one person I should have called months ago. My brother-in-law, Gene, retired from the county district attorney's office after 28 years. He's 71 now, lives 40 minutes away, and he is the sharpest man I have ever known. I hadn't wanted to worry him. I hadn't wanted to seem like a suspicious old man making mountains out of nothing. "I think my daughter-in-law is setting me up for something," I said when he answered. "And I need your help figuring out what." There was a pause. Then Gene said, "Don't touch anything else. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Gene arrived with a young woman he introduced as his former paralegal, now a private investigator. Her name was Sandra. She was in her mid-30s, serious, efficient, and she brought a small kit with her that she used to photograph everything in the toolbox before either of us touched it again. "The prescription bottle is the concern," Gene said, turning it carefully in a gloved hand. "This is a sedative, high dose. If someone wanted to claim you'd been improperly medicating yourself, or that you'd been medicating someone else, or that someone had been medicating me," I said. Gene looked at me over his reading glasses. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." So I did. I told him about Carol, about the way Danny had gone quiet, about the phone call Danny had overheard, about the new house across town, the move, the way Robert had slowly started canceling our Sunday dinners, the way Carol always seemed to be the reason. I told him about the 2 times in the last year when I'd felt strange after dinner at their house, dizzy, foggy, sleeping for 12 hours when I normally sleep 6. Gene and Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, Sandra looked at Gene. Something passed between them. Then she said, "Has your son recently updated any of his legal documents? Will, beneficiary designations, power of attorney?" I opened my mouth, closed it. 6 months ago, Robert had mentioned casually, at dinner, that Carol had been helping him get his affairs in order. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Robert had never been organized about that kind of thing. Claire had handled all of it when she was alive. "I don't know," I said. "We should find out," Sandra said quietly. What followed was 2 weeks of careful, patient work. Sandra made calls. She contacted the county recorder's office. She contacted Robert's insurance company, not mine, his, and asked the right questions in the right way. Gene called a former colleague at the DA's office. Just a casual conversation between old friends. I went about my days as if nothing had changed. I had Danny over for dinner twice a week. I called Robert on Sundays. I was warm to Carol when she answered the phone. I gave not a single sign that anything was different. It was the hardest 2 weeks of my life. What Sandra found was this. 8 months ago, Robert had signed a new power of attorney document giving Carol authority over his financial decisions in the event that he became incapacitated or cognitively impaired. He had also updated his will. The new version contained language I'd never seen in any document Robert had asked me about before, language about my own estate. A clause stating that in the event I was determined to be of diminished mental capacity, the management of any assets I had promised to leave to Danny would pass through Robert. And per the updated document, Robert's financial decisions would be made by Carol. Carol had written herself into the line of succession for everything I own. And there was one more thing. Sandra had quietly contacted my doctor's office and asked whether anyone had recently requested my medical records. Someone had. 3 months ago, someone had requested a complete copy of my medical history, using a signed authorization form with my signature. I had never signed any such form. I sat at Jean's kitchen table and looked at the papers spread out in front of me, and for a long moment I couldn't speak. Not because I was frightened, because I was thinking about Danny, 10 years old, sitting on the back steps in the cold, listening to a phone call he wasn't supposed to hear, and then lying awake in his bed figuring out how to warn me. That boy had done what I hadn't done. He'd trusted his gut. She's building a case, Jean said. The fake prescription bottle suggests she intended to either create the appearance of self-medication or eventually claim she discovered it, raising concerns about your cognitive state, combined with forged medical records, requests, and the power of attorney. She's trying to have me declared incompetent, I said. Jean nodded slowly, so that everything flows through Robert, and through her. I looked at him. Can we prove it? He looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at me. We already have enough for a conversation with law enforcement, she said. But if you want to be absolutely certain enough that there's no wriggling out of it, I'd suggest letting it play out one more step. I knew what she meant. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Tell me what to do, I said. 3 days later, I called Robert. Son, I said, I think I need some help. I've been feeling confused lately, forgetting things. I found some papers I don't understand and I don't know what to do with them. There was a brief pause on Robert's end. What kind of papers, Dad? Insurance things, I think. And some medical stuff. I don't want to make mistakes. I thought maybe you and Carol could come over this weekend and help me sort through everything. Another pause, shorter this time. Of course, Dad. We'll be there Saturday morning. What Robert didn't know was that Sandra had spent Thursday afternoon in my house. She was very good at her job. The small devices she used were no larger than a thumbnail, and she placed them in the living room, the kitchen, and the garage. I also called Danny's school and arranged for him to spend Saturday at his friend Marcus's house. There are things I will not repeat from the recording. Not because they aren't on record, they are, and Jean made sure they were in the right hands by Monday morning, but because some of what Carol said that Saturday morning, when she thought she was alone with Robert in my kitchen while I puttered in the garage, is not something I want to put into words. It was cold in a way I wasn't fully prepared for. It was calculating in a way that made clear this had been in motion for a long time. What I will tell you is this. When I walked back into the kitchen and set the recorder, a second recorder, one I held in my hand, one she could see on the kitchen table, Carol's face went completely still. Robert looked at the recorder, then at me, then at Carol. Robert, I said, and my voice was steady, steadier than I expected. I need you to listen to something. I played him 40 seconds, just 40 seconds. My son is not a stupid man. He had been deceived by someone very skilled at deception, someone who had learned exactly which of his buttons to push his grief, his guilt over not being present enough for Danny after Claire died, his genuine desire to do better. Carol had found the cracks, and she had worked them with patience. It still took 40 seconds for everything to change. Robert didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He went very pale and very quiet, and he said to Carol, in a voice I had never heard from my son before, I need you to leave this house right now. Carol tried twice to speak. Robert said it again. She left. Robert sat down at my kitchen table and put his head in his hands, and we stayed like that together for a long time without saying anything. After a while, he looked up at me. His eyes were red. Danny knew, he said. It wasn't a question. Danny figured it out before I did, I said. Robert closed his eyes. I watched him carry the weight of that, what his son had known, how alone Danny had been with it, how long. It was not a comfortable thing to watch, but it was necessary. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I know, I said. I should have, he stopped. You should have, I agreed. But we're here now. Jean had everything to the district attorney's office by Monday. The forged authorization for medical records was the clearest cut piece. That alone was a crime, and it opened the door to everything else. The fake prescription bottle, the fraudulent insurance documents, the power of attorney obtained under circumstances that Robert was now prepared to testify about. It did not resolve in a week. These things never do. But it resolved. Danny came home that Sunday. Robert picked him up from Marcus's house and brought him straight to my place, and the three of us had dinner together at my kitchen table for the first time in longer than I want to admit. Danny ate 2 bowls of my beef stew and told us about a science project he was doing on deep-sea creatures, and Robert listened with his whole attention in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. At one point, Danny looked at me across the table with his mother's eyes and said, "You okay, Grandpa?" "Better than okay," I said. He went back to studying his placemat, satisfied with that. Kids his age take things at face value when the feeling behind the words is right. He could feel that it was right. Later, after Robert had taken Danny home, I stood in my garage for a few minutes before going to bed. I looked at the old red toolbox in the corner. I thought about Carol standing in that same spot, lifting that lid, carefully placing what she'd placed there, thinking she was setting something in motion that I'd never see coming. I thought about what she'd said on that phone call Danny had overheard. The old man won't even know what hit him. I'm 67 years old. I've buried a wife. I watched my son grieve. I raised a family in this house, fixed everything in it with my own hands, know every creak and every floorboard. I know where the light falls in the afternoon and where the shadows go at night. I know which drawer sticks in January and which window seal needs replacing before the rains come. This is my house. This is my family. And I've been paying attention a lot longer than anyone gave me credit for. I turned off the garage light and went inside. If there's one thing I want you to take from all of this, it's what Danny already seemed to know at 10 years old. When something feels wrong, you don't ignore it and hope it goes away. You find someone you trust. You tell them what you know. You let the people who love you help carry it. I thought for a long time that being the grandfather meant I had to carry everything alone. Be the steady one, not burden anyone with my worries. What Danny showed me by writing 6 words on a scrap of notebook paper and sliding it under my door in the dark is that asking for help isn't weakness. It's exactly what strength looks like. I'm still the protector in this family. I always will be. I'm just not doing it alone anymore. If you're watching this from somewhere out there tonight, I'd love to know where you are and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you love, someone you need to check on, someone who might be sliding a note under your door and hoping you won't miss it, please share it with them. You never know who needs to hear it. Take care of yourselves.